Hello, everybody.
Hi, Sean.
Hi.
Hi, Sean.
How y'all doing tonight? I'm sorry. I've waited 3 years for this. How are you doing tonight? All right. So, before we continue, I just have one thing I got to do. A little group photo. Everyone say cheese. Cheese. All right, great. So, y'all, thank you so much for joining us tonight for Session C of the Spring 2022 Capstone Symposium for the Program on the Environment at the University of Washington. I am so incredibly thrilled to be here with you tonight to share in some excellent presentations by these 9 presenters we have with us. Now, you'll notice there are only 7 presenters down in front. That's because we're living through COVID times, and 2 of our presenters are actually joining us via Zoom. So we're doing the whole hybrid thing, making it work. For those of you who are just joining us, this is the Capstone Symposium. If you haven't ever heard of the Capstone Symposium, I don't know where you've been, but the Capstone Symposium is the culmination of a tremendous amount of work on the part of our students. It represents really about a year's worth of labor on their parts. It's where they take a hands-on internship and they marry that with a research project. You've seen some of the posters out in the lobby, some beautiful posters that really sort of merge all that into a 30 by 40 inch space. That is hard to do. It's also very hard to tell you all of that in 5 minutes, which is what our presenters are going to be doing for you this evening. So you are in for a great treat. I'm assuming that most folks here have seen presentations before, right? You probably have not seen presentations like this. These are Ignite-style lightning talks. That means each of these presenters has 5 minutes. They have 20 slides. Those 20 slides will advance automatically every 15 seconds. So it's quick. There's a lot of energy. And our presenters are going to feed off the energy of this audience. Are you guys good audience members? Yes. Can you give me your good audience faces? We nod. We smile. It's hard to see, but we're smiling, right? And we're super supportive, and that's what we need to do. We need to applaud vigorously. We need to laugh as if we have never heard anything funnier in our lives. All right? Are you guys ready? Yes. Okay, let's give it up for our presenters tonight. One other housekeeping note before I get started. You notice this up here on the screen behind me. There's a QR code. This is day 2 of our 2-day symposium. There were 41 amazing presentations last Wednesday. If you would like to see any of them, snap a picture of that QR code, go to our website, or type in the URL, go to our website, and you can watch all of those presentations. It really is an amazing place to learn a lot about an incredible variety of topics. Today, this session alone, we're going to cover topics that really speak to what POE is all about. We've got sustainability, education, communication, policy, natural science, I'm running out of fingers, business, equity, and environmental justice as well. So, super excited to share that all with you tonight. Other little housekeeping note, our students today in this session will be judged by our anonymous panel, mostly alumni of our program. Thank you so much to our judges for being with us tonight. And if you would like to share anything you see or you want to ask our presenters questions, feel free to do so on Twitter using the hashtag POECap. Let's go ahead and get started, shall we? Okay. Our first presenter is Leander van de Ven. He's an environmental studies major with a minor in environmental science and resource management, and he is graduating in a couple of weeks. Leander is a modern-day Renaissance man. I learned this just today. Not only does he have a mind for science, which you will soon hear about, he is also a member of the Husky cycling team, and he performs clarinet in the campus Philharmonic Orchestra. Woo! I learned all this off this sheet. The title of his presentation is Electrofishing Effects on Endangered Species. His host organization was NOAA Fisheries Protected Resource Division. His site supervisor there was Diana Dishman, and his faculty advisor from campus was Professor Tom Quinn from right here in the School of Aquatic and Fishery Sciences. So let's give it up for Liam.
Salmonids, which are fish in the salmon family, are an integral part of Washington's ecosystems, culture, and economy. Unfortunately, many salmonid populations are currently threatened or endangered due to habitat loss, harvest rates, dams, and climate change. To effectively monitor the recovery of these populations, intrusive sampling methods are regularly permitted. While harm to endangered species is banned under the Endangered Species Act, Section 10 provides exceptions for the purpose of scientific research. Electrofishing is one of these methods that is permitted for use on juvenile salmonids. It uses an electric current passed through water between a metal wire anode and a pole-mounted cathode to stun fish and enable their capture. Electrofishers can be either backpack or raft mounted. Despite being an efficient capture method, electrofishers can have negative health effects on fish, with salmonids being particularly susceptible to mortality, spinal injuries, and hemorrhaging when sampled. So to get a better understanding of the interactions between electrofishing and fish, I asked the following research question. What are the immediate, latent, and population-level health effects of electrofishing on salmonids? The results may shock you. To answer this question, I answered with the NOAA Fisheries Research Permitting Team, which authorizes Section 10 permits in the West Coast region. My work at NOAA consisted of updating literature on the effects on the species of permitted sampling methods. So to answer my question, I conducted an extensive literature review, citing over 25 sources in my final review, and I complemented this with hands-on experience conducting electrofishing with the University of Washington's fisheries class, as shown here. So the immediate health effects of electrofishing are relatively easy to observe and are well understood. They include stress and fatigue, which causes reduced feeding and increased vulnerability to predation. The most detrimental effect is mortality. This typically occurs from asphyxiation or respiratory failure, and electrofishing can also cause spinal injuries and internal hemorrhaging. These are caused by convulsions that are caused when electricity is pulsed or switched on and off. The frequency at which these effects occur depends on a number of factors, including fish age and size, electrofishing waveform, frequency, and the skill of the operator, as well as number of exposures. So the latent or long-term health effects of electrofishing are harder to observe in the wild and are less well understood. However, in my research, I uncovered a body of evidence showing that electrofishing causes reduced growth, particularly in fish that have spinal injuries. So this results in lower weight and length than typical fish. This reduces their competitiveness and increases their vulnerability to environmental stressors and predation. Beyond this, the long-term effects of electrofishing are poorly understood. At the population level, electrofishing does not typically affect abundance unless the population is very small or frequently sampled. Beyond this, the effects on populations aren't well known, as it is also difficult to establish in the wild. In my review, I found a lot of mentions of a need for further research on long-term health effects. I also found a general lack of overall research on electrofishing health effects within the past decade. So, why does this matter? Put simply, we have so many salmonid populations that are in a state of crisis in the state of Washington that we really can't afford any unnecessary harm, even if it is from legal fish sampling for research purposes. So, what can we do about this? Well, we can first of all address this with further research on data gaps. And another measure that NOAA can take is to address the lack of standardized operating guidelines for electrofisher settings. Another step that can be taken is to use less intrusive sampling methods like the seine nets shown here. And we can also collect more data on electrofishing injuries by using existing abundant surveys to find the occurrence and the severity of these injuries. In conclusion, electrofishing is a vital sampling method, but since it has detrimental health effects that are insufficiently understood, we need to address these data gaps. We can also promote electrofishing. And so while sampling of live animals is essential for population recovery and analysis, we need to consider what the trade-offs are in our sampling methods and strive to use the least intrusive methods where possible to reduce harm to these vulnerable species. Thank you to my site supervisor, Diana Dishman, my faculty advisor, Thomas Quinn, my family, and my lovely dog, Hazel, who some of you may have seen in a bag outside. So, thank you very much.
All right, questions for Leander?
Yes, good question. So, NOAA does not permit the electrofishing of adult salmonids in the West Coast region because they are much more susceptible to injury. However, as I noted in my presentation, these growth effects do take effect on juvenile salmon and it impedes their growth, which is why I chose to focus my presentation on juveniles. So it's a less intrusive method. Basically, it sweeps the bottom of a lake or stream, and so you're not doing the electroshock, which can cause a lot of stress to the fish.
Is electrofishing ever used for purposes other than scientific sampling?
Since it is a method that is only permitted through NOAA fisheries, it is almost always permitted just for sampling. There's no real other way of getting a permit for it.
When conducting the sampling, is the intent to catch and release, or is it more so just whatever happens, happens?
It's always catch and release. There is often some incidental mortality, but they're always held for an appropriate amount of time in specific water temperatures. The goal is always to return them in as undisturbed a state as possible, although, of course, being completely undisturbed isn't feasible.
We have one more question.
For electrofishing compared to using the net, what are the differences based on cost and labor?
Yeah, so electrofishing is commonly used because it is so effective at capturing fish. However, the equipment can be rather expensive, and you do need multiple personnel to go behind the electrofisher with nets to collect the fish. You need apparatus for holding them as well. So it can be quite cost intensive. The seine nets aren't quite as effective, but that's one of many other methods that are cheaper and don't cause as much stress to fish.
Great. Thank you so much, Leander. I wasn't sure if we were going to get a question from Hazel as well. All right, just one little switcheroo. We're going to move to one of our online presenters. All right, y'all. Well, we've heard from our first speaker here in person. Now it's time to go to the interweb. Our next presenter today is Sam Zink. Sam is a double major in environmental studies and history with a minor in diversity. She's graduating in the winter of 2023. She's pursuing a degree with honors in environmental studies and has been on the dean's list for 2 consecutive years. That's 6 full quarters. She also worked at the Pacific Northwest Research Institute as a technician for the TEDdy project. That's the environmental determinants of type 1 diabetes in the young. Today, she'll be talking about birds as indicators of habitat quality in the face of climate change. She worked for Washington State's Department of Natural Resources. Her site supervisor there was Dr. Teddy Minkova, and her faculty advisor is our very own Tim Billow, Dr. Tim Billow. So, Without further ado, let's turn it over to Sam. Sam, can you hear us clearly?
Can you hear me?
Yep.
Awesome. Okay. Technology is always funny. I have a question for you. Do you ever find yourself needing an escape? Life is just too much. I've have needed an escape many times when studying climate change. I distract myself in reality TV. The Kardashians in particular, for a binge period of time, act as my eco-anxiety therapy. Reality TV gives me and us a pretend world to live in for at least in an episode amount of time. Now we're going to shift topics a little bit, but we'll come back to this. Here is a northern spotted owl. That is an indicator species. Now, an indicator species is an organism that is used as a proxy for a particular environmental condition within a particular ecosystem, normally for the health of the ecosystem. Now, let's get even more specific and talk about songbirds as indicator species. Songbirds are great indicator species because they are very vocal in telling you that they don't like you, and in defending their breeding ground. They occupy a broad range of habitats, eat a variety of food, have a high conservation priority, and can be monitored inconspicuously, and sometimes have dance battles, apparently. Now, I want to go into more detail about that last reason. My host organization, the Department of Natural Resources, DNR, is currently conducting a study in which they are using songbirds as indicator species. Their study is testing how forest management practices affect the health of the old growth ecosystems, using songbirds as their proxy. They did this by using passive acoustic monitoring, which you can see in this picture is putting up a recording device and leaving it and letting the birds do the rest of the work. Now, my internship duties were to get these collected audio samples and turn them into a sonogram such as this one. From there, I both audibly and visually validated the calls of all 10 indicator species in DNR's study. And here you can see the tagging of a Pacific slope flycatcher's call. Now, this leads into my research question. How has the migratory patterns of the Pacific slope flycatcher and/or the orange-crowned warbler shifted? And now, to discuss my results in a style close to our hearts, without further ado, welcome to the bird slur. For my research, I picked 2 out of the 10 birds in the study and did a risk assessment of which species would have a higher propensity to fall victim to climate change. The final rose winner being the bird that is more suited for adaptation. Our mansion for this episode is the beautiful maritime coniferous forest of the Olympic Peninsula, located on the upper western side of Washington state. Lush and natural, these old growth forests are high in biodiversity and resilience. Now let's meet our contestants. On our left, we have the on the right, we have the Pacific slope flycatcher, and on the left, we have the orange-crowned warbler. That's the orange circle. Now, here behind, you can hear their songs looping. The first high trill is the orange-crowned warbler, and the cat call-esh kind of whoop whoop is the Pacific slope flycatcher. Now, here are the bird's current ranges. We see that the orange-crowned warbler has a much broader range than the Pacific slope flycatcher. But what happens when we add 3 degrees to our current climate? Well, we can expect the orange-crowned warbler to lose 63% of its current summer range, and the Pacific slope flycatcher is going to lose about 24%. Now, it seems as though the Pacific slope flycatcher is in the lead based on these facts, but let's consider some more before the final rose. After conducting my research, I found that neither bird's migratory patterns have shifted yet, but we can expect them to shift in the next 10 to 20 years. So, drum roll. And the final rose goes to climate change? I mean, I guess we should have not been surprised. Climate change is the most dramatic environmental issue of our generation. No matter what, many species will fail at adapting to a radically shifting climate, as ours is doing. Now, at the post-rose ceremony interview, let's discuss what this all means. Climate change winning the rose means that the reliability of indicator species in the future is now uncertain. These are ecosystem services the environment does for humans free of cost, and that we have been dependent on and relied on for a while. And now that's up in the air. So ergo, we need continual research on this topic. DNR and other agencies need to continue to monitor the Olympic Peninsula as their mitigation efforts are paramount in sustaining the Pacific Northwest old growth forests and ecosystems. We all look for distractions to escape from this hellish future, reality TV show or not, but this is our reality and we must act now to change it. Thank you for tuning in to this episode of The Birchler. I am your host, Sam Zink, and I bid you a good night.
All right, questions for Sam? Questions for Sam from the audience? Yes, Angela.
What made you choose those 2 out of the 10 indicators songbird species?
Great question. So actually, out of the 10 birds, only 3 were migratory. So it was pretty easy. How I decided was because you saw that their ranges were pretty similar, but their nesting behaviors were different. So I thought that would be a really good comparison because the orange-crowned warbler nests on the ground in shrubs, while the Pacific slope flycatcher likes to nest up in Douglas firs about 15 to 20 feet in the air. So it was for that similarity and difference kind of comparison within my risk assessment.
Great. Other questions for Sam? Have a question back here? Yes.
Can she hear me?
I think she can.
Okay. Did you consider like running any other climate simulations for like other degrees of warming and like comparing the migration loss?
Great. Did you hear that, Sam?
I think so. I actually looked at multiple different climate predictions. I looked at one for the Olympic Peninsula. I looked at a hydrology prediction. I looked at those photos you saw were from Audubon, which is this really cool bird website for bird nerds. But I actually ended up looking at like 5 different climate prediction models and kind of comparatively, lace them over to kind of get an idea of what the climate's going to look like, and use that to kind of decide, which bird is more F'd or, just, did that make sense? Did I answer the question?
Is that a technical term? No comment. Sam, so another question, this one coming from the internet. This is being done for songbirds in the Olympic Peninsula using passive acoustic monitoring. Is DNR using any other sort of indicator species besides songbirds, or is that kind of where they're focusing right now?
So for the study that I worked on, only using songbirds as indicators. So just for that particular study, because they're using passive acoustic monitoring. So I'm sure that there might be another study out there that they're using different indicator species, but for my site supervisor's own study, they just were using songbirds.
Any other questions? Oh, we have one in the back.
Are there any other factors that are affecting the songbirds' migratory patterns, such as like light pollution?
Did you hear that?
Okay, yeah. So the cool thing about migratory patterns is they're super complex, and scientists don't actually, we have ideas why they do it, but we kind of still don't know. Like there's a kind of a magnetic part of it where they just kind of get up and leave. Like normally they migrate because of lack of resources. So they leave, in the winter months to go to their summer months because that's when insects kind of kick up. It's also a change in temperature. It's just like an innate thing within the birds. Like it's like instinctive. They're just like, oh, it's time to leave today. So I looked at a range of factors within, the pattern, is their food resources changing? Are their favorite, trees changing in the Pacific Northwest? And I found that none of it's really a problem right now. We're all good, but in 10 to 20 years, it's going to hit the fan. And so that's why it's important to start now before everything kind of falls apart.
All this technical jargon, Sam. Thank you so much. Let's give it up for Sam. Okay. I got to get my screen back. Okay, there we go. Okay, and we'll just leave Sam there for now. And we'll move on. All right, thank you all for bearing with me during that technical changeover. Let's go ahead and go back to our live presenters. Our next presenter tonight, Our next presenter tonight is Rachel Luther. Rachel is a double major in environmental studies and political science, graduating in spring of 2022. So just in a couple of weeks. Yay! After she graduates, Rachel is doing an internship with Earth Lab and the Climate Impacts Group on their Northwest Climate Resiliency Project. And that will occupy her time through the summer. And then after that, maybe law school, right?
We'll see.
The title of our project today is Combining Ecological Forestry and Indigenous Knowledges to Adapt Forestry Techniques to a Changing Pacific Northwest Climate. Her host organization was Northwest Natural Resource Group. Her site supervisor there was Rowan Braybrook, and her faculty advisor from here on campus was Professor Ernesto Alvarado from the School of Environmental and Forest Sciences. With that, turn it over to you, Rachel.
Thank you, and I would like to begin by acknowledging the Coast Salish people of this land who are the stewards of the past, present, and the future. I ask for those of you here today to reflect on your own reciprocal relationship with the land during this presentation. This is a quote by a member of the Yakima Nation who is a forester and a food gatherer, and I interviewed her for my project. She says that when tribes share traditional knowledge, everyone in the tribe holds a little bit of it, so it can be difficult to share it with people outside of the tribe. The most important thing to making sure that traditional knowledge is not lost is figuring out how to merge it with Western science. And I wanted to start with this quote to show how tribes are using Western science to bolster their own traditional knowledge and lifeways. This winter, I interned with the Northwest Natural Resource Group, which promotes ecological forestry management. My internship was a snowpack monitoring one where I measured snowpack accumulation in forests of different densities. Ecological forestry focuses on whole ecosystem management with the goal of creating climate-resilient landscapes. Through my internship, we found that thin forests accumulate more snow during the winter, require less water in the summer, and have less fuel for wildfires. I was also interested in indigenous forestry because the thinning practices we used in my internship mimic fire management that has been used since time immemorial to manage cultural landscapes. So this led to my research question, which asked if a combination of traditional ecological knowledge and Western forestry techniques can increase resilience of forests to climate change. And I wanted to ask this question because of the similarities between the two. So I looked to answer my question through interviews of forestry experts, and through my interviews, I found that ecological and indigenous forestry have many goals and outcomes in common, although their methods differ. But the idea of co-management through consultation, coordination, and communication came up a lot, because through it, formal and informal partnerships can form between tribes and management agencies that facilitate reciprocal and respectful knowledge sharing. This nesting model shows how we can achieve enhanced tribal and forest well-being in a context of climate change by using these 4 building blocks. By first recognizing the value of traditional knowledge, we can begin building reciprocal relationships and appreciate the sacredness of traditional knowledge, which allows for collaborative resource management that improves integration of Western and indigenous forestry practices. I will now walk through these in more depth. So first, the value of traditional knowledge comes from thousands of years of reciprocal relationships with the land. This context is key to understanding climate change and how it's affecting ecosystems and the people who rely on them. Traditional stewardship techniques such as first foods management and cultural burning represent holistic ways of restoring ecosystems and building resilience for future generations. Second, relationships are built on mutual responsibility and shared values. Forestry represents a key starting point, but relationships should really go beyond work. Formal relationships that are mandated by the government-to-government relationship with tribes are important, but so are informal and non-working friendships. Relationships that are built on trust are key to creating a safe space for elders to feel comfortable sharing traditional knowledge with resource managers outside of the tribe. Third, because traditional knowledge is cultural knowledge, it's transmitted intergenerationally out of trust, tradition, and respect. As such, care must be taken not to abuse or exploit this knowledge once it's shared with people outside of the tribe. And finally, when tribal resources are held in trust for tribes by the federal government, tribes deserve a say in how they're managed. Traditional knowledge can provide important context for adaptive management techniques that sustain the ecosystems for the future. So as tribes are facing new challenges because of climate change, forestry represents a great starting point for building resilience. And so by involving Indigenous people in future management decisions, we can both improve forest adaptation and resilience to climate change through holistic ecosystem management, and we can achieve enhanced tribal and collective well-being through a justice-based approach to reconciliation and involvement. Thank you, and I would like to thank the Coast Salish people of this land, as well as Christy, Gary, Jal, and Jim, the 4 forestry experts who shared their knowledge with me. And I will now take any questions.
All right, questions?
Yes.
What are your thoughts on integrating traditional knowledge in government policy?
Yeah, that's a great question. So the question was, how can we integrate traditional knowledge with policy? We actually have seen a couple of great examples. So recently, the Biden administration issued an executive order that mandated all federal agencies to start including traditional knowledge in ways that they can. Also, the appointment of Secretary of the Interior, Deb Haaland, represents a great opportunity for Indigenous people to be more involved in government. But also the Tribal Forest Protection Act was passed way back in 2004, and that is another way to integrate traditional knowledge into policy, but it's been traditionally underfunded. So just having more funding for that act would be another great way to do that.
Another question? Over here.
Yes.
You had a quote from one of your interviews in the beginning, and it seems like you spoke to some others. I was just wondering who you spoke to during the process of your Capstone and how you were connected with them.
Yeah, so the question was who I interviewed. And so I kind of found my interviews, well, one of them was with someone who I worked with at the Northwest Natural Resource Group. He was the head forester for them. One of them was Christy Fyender, who is a member of the Yakima Nation, and I actually met her through a class I took a different quarter. And then I also got to interview 2 other foresters, one who used to work for the Quinault Indian Nation, and then another forester who works for the Intertribal Timber Council.
Any questions from the group?
Yes?
I was wondering, you mentioned a bit about your primary methods, interviews, and the data you collected from the snow research. So I was wondering, what were your other primary methods, and how did those methods contribute to your findings?
Yeah. So the question was my methods for research. So I did the interviews with forestry experts. I also did an extensive literature review. And then the data that I collected during my snowpack monitoring internship kind of confirmed the things that I was reading in my literature review.
I see another question down here.
Yes.
Yeah. What kind of forests were you dealing with for the snowpack? Like public lands or private lands?
Yeah, so the question is, what kind of forest was I dealing with? The forest that I was working on is an experimental forest that's part of the Nisqually Land Trust. And so it's actually owned by like a community organization. But the Northwest Natural Resource Group works with lots of different kinds of forests, so like tribal forests, privately owned forests, land trusts, things like that.
Great. Thank you so much. And and just as a reminder, if you want to see a little bit more background, the abstracts for all the presentations can be found on our website. You can scan the QR code or go to the link. And of course, all the presentations from our posters on day one, you can see the presentations on our YouTube channel as well. Let's go ahead and move on to our next presenter this evening. This is Lindsay Feldhoven. Lindsay is an environmental studies major graduating in spring of 2022, so just a couple of weeks, right? Lindsay is currently pursuing honors, which I think is safe to say she will have when she's done. This summer, she'll continue working with the Forest Health Watch, her host organization, and a few other POE Capstone students to turn the research that she's done into a manuscript for publication. So that's a good goal to shoot for. The title of our presentation today is It's Getting Hot in Here. I don't have trouble not start trying to sing that. It's getting hot. You don't want to see me do the dance. Sing it, Sean. No. I'm going to resist. It's getting hot in here. The relationship between climate change, environmental health disparities, and the Seattle street trees. Her host organization, as I said, is Forest Health Watch, where she worked with Dr. Joey Hilbert, and her faculty advisor is our very own Dr. Tim Billow here in the program and the environment.
Due to climate change and the increase of industrial development and urbanization, we are now seeing very high levels of pollution and heat islands forming in urban areas. This is happening right here in our very own beautiful city of Seattle. Urban residents are beginning to feel their neighborhoods warming, and this is because materials such as concrete and asphalt are really good at absorbing heat. But urban trees are great tools to alleviate some of this heat and filter out air pollution, as well as promoting general human health and well-being. One of the ways that trees can do this is by providing shade. Extreme heat is one of the largest stressors to human health, so it may be more important now more than ever before to preserve our urban trees. Trees are extremely important tools for the mitigation and adaptation for cities to adjust to our changing climate. Some of the important ecosystem services that trees provide are the removal of air pollution, carbon sequestration, and heat alleviation. The problem is, as global warming worsens, we're seeing a positive feedback loop between heat and tree dieback. So this means that as the planet is warming, trees are becoming less and less able to reduce heat, which just accelerates climate change. We're seeing an increase in the amount of tree dieback in cities all over the globe. Tree dieback refers to when a tree's canopy is thinning. So for my research project, I determined the percentage of dieback based on my own perception of how much the trees are thinning. I also wanted to compare this to the socio-demographics of the city, so I used the Environmental Health Disparity Index, which uses a scale from 1 to 10 and ranks it from least vulnerable to very vulnerable to multiple environmental exposures and hazards. The way this is calculated is by considering different factors such as PM 2.5 concentration, heavy traffic roadways, race and ethnicity, and rates of poverty, and more. So, for my research project, I wanted to look at, is there a correlation between the dieback of Seattle street trees and environmental health disparities, also known as EHD? And if so, what does this mean in terms of both human and tree health? So I worked with Forest Health Watch, and I helped them with collecting observations for their Western Red Cedar Dieback Map project. So this was a project on iNaturalist where they were mapping the dieback of Western red cedars all up and down the Pacific Northwest. And I was able to contribute around 60 observations to this project. In addition to this, for my own research project, I also created an additional project where I was able to go and record these same trees and answer additional questions such as the dieback percentage and other factors that I thought may be contributing to the dieback as well. And the reason that I decided to use Western red cedars as my indicator species is because this is a native species who is already showing trouble adapting to our changing climate. And this tree also has a large cultural significance to many indigenous tribes across the Pacific Northwest. So to begin my methods, I first downloaded Seattle street tree data and the environmental health disparity ranking into GIS and filtered to only include Western red cedars in those ranked 1 through 3 or 8 through 10. Next, I also only filtered to include medium-sized trees and privately owned trees, and I performed a random selection of 10 trees per rank to get a sample of 60 trees total. And I assigned all these trees an ID number and put them into Google Maps so that I could find them in real life easier. And here are the results of my data collection. On the y-axis, we have the dieback percentage, and on the x-axis, we have the environmental health disparity ranking. And as you can see, there is a slight positive relationship between the dieback and the environmental health disparity ranking. So this means that communities that are living with more environmental health disparities are also experiencing their trees having more dieback, and this means that their trees are less healthy. This is a critical environmental justice issue. Why? Because these communities that are experiencing more environmental health disparities are often comprised of families who may be people of color, low income, and have pre-existing conditions. And the acceleration of tree dieback is just going to exacerbate some of these issues. In order to implement mitigation strategies against tree dieback, we first need to understand what factors are driving this dieback and what communities are being affected most. To do that, we need more research, and if you would like to contribute to this research, you can scan this QR code and go out on your own and contribute observations to that same Western red cedar dieback map. And if you do, you'll be a part of a really amazing research opportunity that will really contribute to helping the trees in our local area. And I would like to thank my site supervisor, Dr. Joey Holbert, and my faculty advisor, Dr. Tim Billow, and give a huge thanks to all of my peers and my friends and family for all their love and support throughout this whole thing.
Lindsay's got fans in the audience. Okay, Lindsay, questions?
Yes.
Is there a standardized methodology for computing the dieback percentages? And is that, if people wanted to get involved, is that something a skill they can kind of pick up relatively quickly? Or how does that work?
So for this project, this one's a little bit different than my own personal one. So this project doesn't include the percentages because that is pretty objective. So that's something that I tried to kind of control with just myself. But this project contains other questions such as like what symptoms you're seeing. So if you're seeing like thinning, browning, bare top, mechanical scratches, or like sidewalk kind of impeding on the roots, just more factors like that to kind of like figure out what's really driving the dieback. Yeah.
Other questions? We have one down. Oh, you have a bunch. Okay.
In the back.
Do you think the season or like winter quarter when you did it had anything to affect your results?
I don't think so. My site supervisor didn't seem to think that that would play a difference, but I do wonder if I waited and did it like in the summer, maybe if the trees would have had more heat damage after like a really hot summer. So yeah, that definitely would be interesting to look at again. And I'm hoping to continue more observations this summer, so I guess we'll see.
One more question?
Yes.
Why did you choose to use trees that just ranked 1 to 3 and 8 to 10?
Yeah, so I decided to only use like the lower and higher ends of the ranking just so that I'd get a good sample of kind of like low health disparities and high, and to make this project more manageable for myself since it was only in a few weeks time frame that I could collect the trees. So yeah.
Okay, maybe one more.
Yes.
Was it difficult for you to find ways to narrow down which types of trees and which areas to study throughout time?
Yeah, it was definitely difficult at first when I was like first trying to decide what to do, but luckily my site supervisor was working on this Western red cedar dieback map, so I just kind of took that and I was like, oh, I can kind of like kill two birds with one stone, you know, work on that, add observations, and then also do my own research project. So that's how I decided.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, y'all, we're going back to the interweb now for our next presenter. Anya, can you hear us okay?
Yeah, can you guys hear me?
I guess we can. Let me go ahead and introduce you. Our next presenter is Anya Gravilko. She's a double major in environmental studies and community environment and planning. Anya has really immersed herself in justice work while she's been here at the university, primarily in food justice. She was both the ASUW Student Food Co-op co-manager and also within the city of Seattle an AmeriCorps Vista volunteer. Today, she's going to be talking about environmental justice without environmental gentrification. She's going to explain to us what environmental gentrification is. Her host is Lake City Collective, where she worked with Cesar Garcia, and her faculty advisor from here on campus is Professor Ken Yoakum in the Department of Landscape Architecture. Without further ado, I'd like to turn it over to Anya.
Increasing access to green space in urban areas that have been historically underinvested in due to structural racism and classism in urban planning is an important form of environmental justice work. However, this can at times have unintended consequences, as seen here with the installation of the 606 Park in Chicago. Green space is an amenity that improves the quality of life. Increasing such amenities in vulnerable areas that are often non-white, low-income, can catalyze and exacerbate gentrification and resulting displacement. Gentrification is the change of a neighborhood's character associated with increased affluence, while displacement is when people have to move against their will. Unfortunately, increasing access to green space can contribute to gentrification and displacement. This is known as environmental gentrification. This tension brought me to my research question. What are the best practices to increase access to green space in historically underinvested areas without contributing to gentrification and displacement in those neighborhoods? The inspiration for this research question came from my internship with Lake City Collective. I've been an environmental justice intern at Lake City Collective since September of 2020. One of the most significant projects that I worked on is their Littlebrook Park redesign project. Littlebrook Park is the only green space in the Littlebrook neighborhood, which is a dense, diverse renter-majority community. The park is not meeting the needs of the community, so therefore it is undergoing a park redesign process led by the community. Next, we will see an image of the final design, which was made by Partners Site Workshop based on feedback from several community-led workshops facilitated by Lake City Collective over Zoom with several translations. My work was to help financially fund this project by applying to grants. Although this redesign is exciting, it has brought up concerns from community members and designers of causing gentrification and displacement. As you can see, Littlebrook Park is located in an area that is of high risk of displacement, according to the Office of Planning and Community Development. My hope was to do research that would help Lake City Collective implement this park design without having to worry about contributing to gentrification in their neighborhood, which brought me to my research question. In order to answer my research question, I analyzed existing literature regarding this topic and conducted 7 expert elicitation interviews. There's a relatively small body of literature regarding environmental gentrification, so I was able to learn a lot in a short period of time. I then also conducted interviews with 7 professionals from the Puget Sound region with expertise related to environmental gentrification. Based on both the literature and the interviews, I found 4 overlapping practices recommended to limit environmental gentrification. The findings from my research are general recommendations that are meant to serve more as a broad overview of consideration for different stakeholders when working on projects related to increasing access to green space. I will now go through each one individually. So first, we have intentional community involvement during the park design process. This practice is critical to ensure that the park design is representative of the needs, wants, and identities of the existing community. Not doing so can foster faster gentrification. Next, we have collaboration across city departments. Environmental gentrification is a complex issue that touches on many different aspects of urban planning. Having more collaboration across departments, like the one on this slide, allows for more holistic decision-making. In addition, we also have the joint development of parks and affordable housing. In this slide, you can see examples of different joint development based on different land use. This is important to ensure that affordable housing remains even if gentrification does occur. And finally, we have investments in the neighborhood beyond green space, which are necessary to develop a neighborhood that is stable and can build generational wealth. An example of this that Lake City Collective has implemented is establishing a community center in Littlebrook. These findings will hopefully allow Lake City Collective to better navigate conversations and decision-making regarding the Littlebrook Park redesign when working with partners. However, it is important to note that environmental gentrification is a very context-dependent issue, and the practices I presented are more general in nature. So therefore, they may not all be equally relevant to Lake City Collective. Next steps would be to do a deeper analysis of the Little Brook neighborhood and see which practices would be most successfully implemented there. Yes. And so I would just like to say much gratitude and my most sincere and warmest thanks to Cesar and Peggy Garcia, who were large sources of support from the City Collective, my faculty advisor, Dr. Kenyoka, all the interviewees who took time out of their busy day to talk with me, my Rodina, my family, my friends, the POE and CP cohorts, and my beloved three-legged dog, Lady. Thank you.
All right, questions for Anya? Any questions from the audience? Yes, Angela.
In reference to your literature review, did you find that the existence of community engagement looked different between neighborhoods of different income or racial demographics?
Yeah, so what sometimes would occur is that there wouldn't be, sometimes what would happen is a city would come in and be like, oh my goodness, this place, there's no green space and we want to increase it either for like a justice or like a climate resilience perspective. So they would just go in and implement a green space. And then what would happen is people in that area would either maybe feel unsafe because now there's this big park that's dark at night and they don't feel comfortable walking around. Or the park has a tennis court when no one there plays tennis. So, and that is more likely to happen in areas that are of lower income and have residents who are have less time to maybe be involved in the park meetings and seek out those opportunities themselves. So that is sort of like examples of what I would see in my literature and hear about in my interviews is like designs being implemented that do more harm than good. So that's why the community involvement is important.
Great, thank you. Other questions for Anya? We have a question in the back.
What was some of the reasons that they decided to do the park redesign project?
Did you hear that okay?
Yes, I think the question was, what was the reason that Lake City Collective did the park redesign? The reason is because there actually is a new apartment complex that got built across the street from Little Brook Park. And it is a typical new development, gentrification looking complex. And a lot of the people are dog owners who don't feel a sense of connection to the neighborhood and have started using the park as a dog park, despite all the different families and existing community members who now can no longer use the park because it's become a public health issue. So that was the big reason to create a park that is actually able to be used by the community.
Question back here.
Does part of the new park design accommodate dogs?
Oh yeah. Hazel wants to know.
What was the question? I missed the last part.
The park redesign, does it accommodate dogs? Is there a dog-friendly area?
Yes, it's actually, there is, it's really quite exciting. There's like specific types of like turf that like filter the dog urine and feces so it doesn't smell, and it would be right by the bathroom because there's a bathroom at the park. And there also would be in the design like more increasing of space along the streets so that there's more green space for the dogs to walk. So the dog walkers are being included in the design. Everyone's needed.
Oh, that's good. We want to make sure that's happening. Great. Maybe one more question? Yeah, Eli.
Dude, I mean, that was great. But, you know, ultimately, one of the things that happens when this kind of great development happens and there's more green space, and one of the things that drives gentrification then is the increase in home values, right? Which then, you know, people who own homes might want to capitalize by selling their homes. So I'm just curious if there are groups like the Lake City Collective, like, are there ways that they can get involved to help deal with that particular piece of the issue? And yeah.
Yes, I didn't have enough time to touch on it in my 5 minutes, but an interesting thing that some community groups are able to do are invest in community land trusts. There's examples of that already happening in Seattle, like with Africa Town Now. And then by owning the land and ensuring that it can't be sold for for-profit development, they can create affordable housing. But that does take a certain level of capacity building for sure.
All right, well, thank you so much, Anya. Give your dog a pat for us, okay? All right, we're going to go ahead and switch back over to our in-person presentations. Oops. Okay. All right. Moving on, y'all. Our next presenter in our session is Emma Radish. Emma is a double major in environmental studies and history, graduating in June of 2022. A couple weeks from now. Now, I've learned through my yellow clipboard that Emma is a skier, but she's no ski bum. She's president of the RCO and nonprofit organization Husky Winter Sports that offers accessible snow sports to UW students. So that's very cool. She plans on, I think, doing a little bit of ski bumming after graduation. The title of her presentation today is Online Learning, Best Practices for Environmental Science Webinars with Alaska Native Communities. She worked with NOAA's Alaska Fisheries Science Center as part of her internship, where her site supervisor was Lisa Haruki Raring, and her faculty advisor from here on campus was Professor Dawn Hardison Stevens in the College of Education and the Department of American Indian Studies. Without further ado, let's turn it over to Emma.
All right, can you guys hear me okay on the mic? Yeah? Okay, perfect. Since the beginning of the COVID-19 pandemic, we've seen our already incredibly online world take a turn further into the virtual. Today, we're going to be talking about some of the amazing opportunities for environmental education that remote learning has to offer. And no, I'm not just talking about how you can go to class from your bed. Today, we're going to be talking about webinars. Webinars are a great tool for environmental education because they're easily accessible, they create a reusable learning source, and they're accessible to people all over the world, including people in rural and remote communities. For my Capstone internship, I worked with the NOAA Alaska Fisheries Science Center on their webinar series, NOAA Live Alaska. This series is aimed at sharing environmental topics in Alaska with grades 2 through 8, but is open for anyone to register. My research question for my capstone is, what are the best practices for environmental science webinars working with remote Alaska Native communities? My team specifically looked at the ways that we could increase our outreach, engagement, and accessibility for these communities in this season of NOAA Live Alaska. The ways that I collected my results for this research question was learning from our experiences hosting and facilitating weekly webinars, conducting my own independent literature research, as well as conducting 8 interviews with educators in Alaska that had been to our webinars. On this map here, you can see all of the locations of our interviewees, whether they were working there or are from there originally, and all of the places in red are places off the road system, which is a pretty unique remote kind of place for Alaska where it's only accessible by boat, plane, or snow machine in the winter. And you can also see down here where Seattle is, where we were hosting the webinars, so it's pretty far. And this is a really important distinction for these communities because they're remote, have a high concentration of Alaska Native populations, and they're perfect for webinars since they're far away. The 3 main themes that my results fell under are the importance of building a long-term relationship with your community, adapting the technology we used to that community, and then also making sure to incorporate culturally responsive teaching into every one of our webinars. For Alaska Native peoples, there is a very recent history of settler colonial education being used as a tool for cultural genocide. Because of this, before doing any sort of educational work with these communities, we have to make sure to build a relationship on trust. It's also really important for these communities, since they're remote, to adapt to the type of internet and computer access that they have there, since it can be really a lot more limited than what we're used to in big cities like Seattle. And lastly, it's really important to include culturally responsive teaching in every single aspect of our webinar. And culturally responsive teaching is an educator's ability to adapt to each student's different learning styles and cultural backgrounds, working with those instead of against it. So to start off, we're going to talk about how to incorporate each of these main themes into every step of the webinar process, from preparation, advertising, webinar, and post-webinar. Starting off with the preparation phase, during this, we're making sure we're recruiting speakers and getting everything settled, set up, in order, so we have a good webinar to show. And one way that we increased our outreach to Alaska Native communities with this was to recruit a speaker from those target communities. So we would reach out to people that lived in the communities we were trying to give environmental education programs to. This is one example of that with Lance Kramer, who shared his subsistence lifestyles. And here you can see the seal that they would hunt, braid the intestines, and then dry out the blubber. And these practices were really important and resonated well with Alaska Native audiences. For the advertising phase, we wanted to make sure everything looks good on both a computer and a mobile device to increase accessibility for Alaska Native communities. This is because if we think back to that map that we looked at earlier, all of those places in red with fairly limited computer and internet access, many people in them choose to use their smartphone as their main computer because of cost barriers or access barriers. And then you can see one example, a screenshot of our recording, and it looks great on a phone, which is great for everyone. And then for our actual webinar, we wanted to make sure to increase engagement from our Alaska Native students, that we facilitated conversations that connected Alaska Native culture directly to STEM topics so they could see that inherent connection between art and science. This is one example of that, where Tonya Osborne, an Alaska Native artist, student, and researcher, shared her jewelry making business alongside her research on St. Lawrence Island. And you can see the art as well as the science, math, and engineering that go into that process. Lastly, during our post-webinar phase, we would debrief as a team and make sure we asked ourselves what we could improve on for next time. We wanted to make sure we could continue improving our relationships with these communities, adapt our technology to any issues that might have occurred during our webinars, and make sure to incorporate their culture. Incorporating Alaska Native culture into environmental science education is really important because it can uplift Alaska Native students and show them that they've always had the inherent skills to succeed in STEM topics. This can fight against the harmful narrative that only focuses on some disparities experienced by Native peoples, and instead show the incredible intersection of art and science in Alaska Native culture. Thank you so much. I would like to thank a lot of people. My site supervisor and the rest of my team at NOAA Alaska, my faculty advisor, all of our interviewees, my co-intern who's in the crowd, and my professor, Sean, of course, and my friends and family for getting me to graduation.
Okay, questions for Emma?
Yeah.
What was the biggest challenge you faced during this internship?
That's a great question. So the biggest challenge that our team faced was, I would say, two different things. First off, this is only the second season of NOAA Live Alaska. It's based off of NOAA's broader webinar series, NOAA Live. And so that was really challenging just because not all of the kinks of funding and grants and staffing and scheduling and figuring out even enough people to really run a webinar series were worked out yet. So that's still something we're trying to work on. And then also another challenge I would say is that my internship was all remote. So it was harder to build those relationships, but because of our team's pre-existing relationships with these communities, it was a lot easier for me to be able to join them in that. Yeah.
So how do you strike a balance between sort of teaching Western environmental science and respecting sort of their local and traditional knowledge, and sort of during those webinars to allow that sort of exchange like that?
Yeah, definitely. So for this season of our webinars, we focused on having community speakers, so it was more heavily leaning on the traditional knowledge, but there's always a balance, especially since we're coming from a Western education program. And so one way to do that is to, one, have community speakers, so make sure that people from the community, they're the best people to know what their community needs to hear and what they want to hear, so that was really important. And also bringing in native language alongside maybe some other Western topics, and yeah, making sure that we're going in and asking what the community wants and needs, because sometimes they don't need us to tell them about Western science, and that is also great. And so we need to be able to adapt to what those communities need and give that to them. Yeah.
What was your biggest lesson or takeaway from this?
Yeah, that's a great question. So I would say my biggest takeaway was seeing all the different ways that our cultures empower us to use science, technology, engineering, and math every day. I was not someone who those topics came easily to, and so it was really great to be able to see the different ways that I practice those every day because of my culture or my lifestyle, and then see that in other people as well. Yeah.
In what context are the students watching these webinars? Are they in school or is it for fun?
Yeah, so our target audience was kids in grades 2 through 8. So because of that, we tried to figure out a time that would work for all of them, which is usually school time. And then also in these more remote communities, there is usually pretty reliable in-school or in community center internet and computers, but not as much at home. So it was important that we were able to present these webinars at a time when the kids would be in school. And so depending on what community we were trying to reach out to for each specific topic, we would make sure that the time we had our webinars coincided with the time when they would be in class and not like at lunch or having a day off, or if it was during any kind of like big weeks off for students in Alaska.
Great. Thank you so much. All right, y'all. We have heard so many great presentations so far. Let's just keep it going, shall we? That enthusiasm is not waning. That is great. Fantastic. Our next presenter is Victoria Harmon. Victoria is an environmental studies major and a political science minor, graduating spring of 2022. Victoria is also pursuing honors in environmental studies, and I think she's on her way there. The title of her presentation, Communication is Key, Recommendations for Scientists and Decision Makers for Implementing Effective Climate Policy. Her host organization was NOAA's Alaska Fisheries Science Center. Her site supervisor there was Dr. Kirsten Holzman, and her faculty advisor was Dr. Lubna Alzaru with the UW Department of English and within the program on the environment. Let's go ahead and give it up for
All right, I'm sure we've all heard the term communication is key. And although it's usually used to describe relationships, it can also be used to describe climate policy. News headlines can give us a good idea of the communication between scientists and decision makers, which is often strenuous. For my internship, I worked with the National Oceanic and Atmospheric Administration doing internal communication work. I worked with scientists of all fields to produce a newsletter and ArcGIS story map to help the ACLIMB project progress. As more and more IPCC reports are published, it becomes increasingly apparent that effective climate policy must be enacted quickly. Top-down strategies are just as, if not more important, than individual actions. And working with a governmental agency showed me how the collaboration between environmental scientists and decision makers is incredibly important for handling these environmental issues. All right, so even though scientists and decision makers often have different worldviews or perceptions of their work, they still need to be able to collaborate together to create these policies. And so what's missing is adequate communication. And so first we'll look at between scientists. So we need to improve the communication between scientists, and then we can try improving communication between scientists and decision makers. And this led me to my research questions. So first I asked, what are the best preferred communication methods and strategies among scientists and among decision makers? And then I asked, how can these two parties, if their preferences differ, come to common ground? And to do this, I interviewed scientists within NOAA, each with different specializations. I also surveyed scientists and agencies outside of NOAA, and I conducted a literature review concerning the preferences of decision makers. And through my interviews and surveys, I found that visual aids and frequent meetings are highly preferred for scientists. Scientific jargon prohibits or inhibits communication, and face-to-face interactions are highly valued. Relationship building is also highly valued. For my literature review, I found that a high hierarchy of leadership is highly preferred, and it's preferred that scientists understand the influence that decision makers have. So this funnel graph shows that trust building is the preferred method of communication for scientists when communicating with one another. Visual aids and limited use of jargon are also valued.
And here I combine my data of scientists with data outside of my own data, other studies, to show the comparison of values for different communication categories, which are shown on the x-axis. The y-axis shows us the percentages of respondents that value each category, with green being scientists and blue legislators. And if we see the last column, it shows that relationship building is highly valued by both parties. This shows us that we really want these two groups to collaborate and communicate with one another. And we really want them to be building those personal relationships to allow them to get to know one another on a more personal level rather than just nothing. So scientists should pay attention to the political terms of decision makers. It's much more effective to contact them in the beginning of their terms rather than during election season or at the end of their terms. And additionally, because there's such a disconnect in expectations, decision makers can create a list of recommendations, such as where they are lacking scientific understanding and what topics they are most concerned with. And lastly, this research creates a new opportunity for an intermediate position between research and policy implementation. So if the two parties are still having trouble connecting, a third party can be introduced to facilitate that communication. And so when these relationships are built, environmental research can begin to have a stronger influence on our climate, public view of policy could improve, and humans can continue to have a positive impact on our environment. And interdisciplinary work is incredibly important for solving issues such as climate change because we really need an input of so many people of all sectors, of all backgrounds, and all their inputs together. Thank you. I would like to thank my site supervisor, Kirsten Holzman, my faculty advisor, Lumna Alzaru, Sean, and my friends and family for supporting me throughout this whole journey.
Questions for Victoria?
Eli.
So, I mean, this is super cool. I mean, it's really actually super cool what you did, and sort of so strongly, really cool. And I have this question, which is, like, okay, so in the future, we may have legislators that represent better the people in our nation, right? Mm-hmm. So there might be something we might look into, well, instead of sort of the houses of power as the people populating those houses of power, both in science and also in policymaking, begin to shift. Do you think that thinking into the future, what is valued between those groups may shift? Do you know what I'm asking?
A little bit.
As the revolution happens.
Right. Okay. So thinking like if decision makers would kind of change their values for the environment, is that kind of what you're getting at?
No, if decision makers are more broadly representative of the citizenry of our nation. You know, both in sort of where they're coming from, both in terms of race and culture, but also in terms of sort of economic status and things like that. Like if there was a policymakers that represented the people more directly.
Okay. Yeah, then I completely think that it would, communication between the two parties would improve because I think that, like I mentioned in the beginning of my presentation, a lot of times people think that, or even just themselves, they think of themselves as two completely different worlds, science and politics. And with interdisciplinary work increasing in recent years, we've already seen that it's starting to kind of get the ball rolling of improving communication, but it's still not getting there, but I do think it will improve in the future.
See another question over here?
I was curious as to where you sourced your data, the outside data that you used for the second graph.
Yeah, so in my literature review, I was really interested in the preferences of decision makers, and so I found a really interesting paper, a study by Castaneda Menda and Pulido Salgado. It's called Connecting Policymakers to Science Through Communication. It was right up my alley, and I sourced my data from that and combined it with mine.
One more question? Yeah.
Did you come across any challenges when trying to reach people for interviews or surveys?
My interviews, luckily my host organization was incredibly supportive and nice, and they were all so amazing. I got interviews really well with them. But the survey was definitely hard. I definitely did not get as many respondents as I would have liked because I was going outside of NOAA and I was trying to find other agencies. So I think that was the main difficulty, but I think the combination of interviews and surveys made up for the fact.
Great. Well, thank you so much. All right, while they're switching over the mic, just as a reminder, if you want to hear more about any of the presenters today or any of the presentations from day one or our poster highlight presenters, snap a shot of the QR code, go to our website, and you can see a lot more information, including the abstracts, including summaries of all the presentations, and in the case of our poster presenters, videos of their individual presentations. Let's move on now. Our next presenter today, our penultimate presenter today, is Shay Holmes. She's an environmental studies major and a global health minor, graduating in spring of 2022. All about that. But she's not done with UW yet. She's not done with it yet. She's coming back next year for one more year of eligibility as a fifth year for UW soccer. She's on the soccer team, so awesome for us. And while she's at it, she's not just going to play soccer. While she's at it, she's going to pursue her master's degree in sustainable transportation here. So she'll be a double dog. Woo! Awesome. The title of her presentation today is Back the Pack, Sustainability and Climate Change Among Student Athletes and Non-Athletes, a topic that's near and dear to her heart. Her host organization is UW Athletic Sustainability, where her site supervisor was Karen Babler. Her faculty advisor was Professor Christy Eby at Global Health and Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences. So let's give it up for Shay.
Let's back the pack. I usually like to start off my presentations with a bit of a pun, just to set the tone, especially when it comes to climate change, because it can be a real icebreaker.
Whoa.
Okay, but seriously, climate change is affecting everyone, and athletes specifically have big lifestyle footprints. They also are being disproportionately affected physically through heat and pollution. But this firsthand experience also allows them opportunity to give them a platform to speak up and promote change against climate change. So college generations are target populations, and universities are vital hubs in mitigating our climate crisis. 4 ways colleges are doing this now are through green buildings, alternative transportation modes, food shortage and consumption, and water use and recycling. So with this brought me to my research question: how does our climate crisis affect the knowledge and mindsets of Pac-12 college student athletes and non-athletes? So I interned with the UW Sustainability Athletics Department, and my site supervisor created the group called SAUCE, which stands for Student Athletes at the University of Washington for Sustainability. And this was what really sparked our interest in wanting to look at athletes specifically, passions, mindsets, and knowledge about sustainability. So I wanted to take this a step further, and I wanted to compare it to the groups of non-athletes in order to pass along to our Pac-12 Team Green. This is a group that's the first in its college athletics, and they're the ones who create our zero waste games, Go Green games, and all 12 Pac-12 schools are represented in this group. So with this, my methods were I conducted a literature review, I created a 20-question online survey, as well as I got to talk to even UW athletes and non-athletes just for some more personal suggestions on how to create more change across UW. So I received a total of 111 responses, and 7 out of the 12 Pac-12 schools were represented. So from this, I asked one of the questions: what is the most beneficial way to learn about climate change and sustainability? My top 2 answers were class and lectures and talking with peers, friends, and teammates. I found this a little surprising knowing the typical college student. So another issue is mental health, as we all know, is a concern across all college generations, and specifically eco-anxiety is a rising one. So with this, I asked the question: how often do these groups experience eco-anxiety when it comes to climate change? And both groups said they frequently do. So to compare these groups, it actually came across that non-athletes experience more eco-anxiety than athletes, which can be seen in 1 of 2 lights. 1, athletes just don't care about climate change, or 2, they might just have better coping mechanisms. So another interesting fact I wanted to know was the likeliness of student athletes versus non-athletes in using their voice to promote change. And with this, it was seen that non-athletes were very likely to wanting to promote change to mitigate climate change versus athletes. In my survey, 96% of non-athletes answered that they think addressing climate change is extremely important, and only 60% of athletes thought the same. So this just might suggest that non-athletes are more willing and more likely to want to promote the change, and they just might be more conscious of all the impacts climate change has on them. So my internship informed my results because one, it gave me evidence that we need more athletes in SOS, and my evidence is supported in my surveys, but also that in my literature reviews, it supported that a growth mindset is associated with a pro-environmental behavior. So I conducted 2 proposals, one for my host organization and one for the Pac-12 Team Green. For my host organization, I split up into 3 sections: short-term, action-specific, and future. My short-term goals for SOS were to include like flyers, sustainable competitions, social media, just to get more people to join. My action-specific ones included finding lower carbon-intense flights when we travel, eco kits on trips, less food waste, community cleanups. And then for the future, just partnering SOS with non-UW athlete groups and clubs just to spark more of the conversation across UW. So for my Pac-12 Team Green proposal, I proposed that we start a student Pac-12 Team Green group. So just like them, we have 1 student athlete rep and 1 non-athlete rep to promote this change, as well as suggesting that we embed more sustainable and environmental courses across all of our degrees. So this is me getting to share my passion with the UW gymnast team. And I also got to share my passion at the UW Baseball Go Green game. Climate change does affect the knowledge and mindsets of Pac-12 college student athletes and non-athletes, and there is a difference between these 2 groups. So my next steps in this process are including more climate change, sustainable, and environmental courses across all degrees, since it matters in all of those sectors, taking more action-oriented steps to continue to progress forward, discussing and talking with peers to decrease our eco-anxiety, and overall, giving the student athletes the platform to encourage them to use it and use their voice to promote change, all in order to increase our climate and sustainable action towards mitigating climate change. It starts at UW and it starts within the Pac-12. So let's not only back the pack, let's back our planet. I can already smell the fresh air of the future. Thank you to my site supervisors, my faculty advisor, and this is our SOS Twitter tag if you want to reach them, and this is my Twitter tag. Thank you.
Okay, Kristen Michelle.
Yeah.
What's the goal of the Pac-12 Team Green super?
So just like how I mentioned up there, is they have representatives from athletics and departmental groups. So just like that, we'd have an athlete rep, a non-athlete rep, and just how they do, like kind of promoting the Go Green games, zero waste games. I really think it'd be a good idea to have students' voices involved in that process. So like what we would look for, what we would get encouraged to promote at games, like how we would want to recycle or compost or do all that waste diversion. And then they could meet like once a quarter and just get together and then have another group for there too to go back and report to. So that's kind of the idea and the goal of it'd be kind of like what they do, but just on a student level, so we have more say of our generation. Oh gosh, there's 3 of you like right in a row. We'll go back and then we'll just go like, yeah, so yeah.
Okay, so what was your sample population when surveying non-athletes? I was wondering like, what if like lots of environmental studies students got involved in?
Yeah, so actually, it was actually really cool. So I was expecting that. I kind of prepared myself. But in my survey, I sent it to all Pac-12 Team Green members. They passed it along to their campuses. And basically, I received responses so athlete-wise, it was 50-50. So I got like 49 athletes, and then non-athletes, it was like 51, whatever that math is. But then it was kind of cool because major-wise, it was a whole variety. I had some from like neuroscience. I had some from like marketing, because like all the schools also have different majors, so it's kind of neat. My population was UW, but in general, it's kind of cool how many actual different majors there were listed in my survey. It's kind of cool how many people wanted to support it. So, yeah.
My question was kind of similar. I was just thinking, we saw different preferences and sort of concerns with the students or the athletes and non-athletes. I'm just wondering, could that be driven by demographic differences between the 2 groups and sort of their backgrounds and what their families believe or care about?
Yeah, that would be something really interesting to look into, and that's why I kind of started. I didn't fully puncture through the depth of it, but that's why the surface level, I was really interested in the mindsets of these. And I could have included some of those on my background. Yeah, because my background survey was more like age, like what year they were, to just see maybe if they had less or more knowledge on it. What I've even asked like if they took classes on the environment, things like that. But demographics, more in depth, would have been interesting if I would have even gone deeper into just the UW level. Because also the other thing I considered was Washington could be different than California, what they want and suggest, just because of the different like climates and even different to Arizona. So it's kind of cool to see the different suggestions based on schools as well. So yeah. Yeah.
What current practices for sustainability do you see right now in the athletic department?
So we're trying to do one of the things we did, so actually fun fact, there was a POE student that actually graduated a couple years ago. She's on the volleyball team. She created our like compost, and like, so we have stickers all up on our like recycling, trash bins, all that stuff. And then we actually just hosted, SAUCE actually just hosted an Earth Day. So we actually did restoration behind our facilities. We did like invasive species cleanup and trash pickup and all that sort of thing. And then, yeah, like I said, we do the zero waste games and go green games. So if you ever come to sports in the fall season, spring season, winter, every team has a go green game where we set up a tent. We teach everybody coming in about sustainability and how to go green. And then there's usually like a little video. And then, yeah, the zero waste games, we compete against other Pac-12 schools to see who can come out with this less waste diversion rate. So it's kind of cool.
All right. One more question. One more.
Oh God, there's two. I think the one in the back had it up. Yeah, so the Growth Mindset Association was with like pro-environmental behavior, and one of the literature things I did, because I was interested in the mindset aspect, was based on the author, she was looking just at like how having, like if you have a fixed mindset around that sort of thing, you're less likely to want to change. You fall into this more of like eco-anxiety, like kind of thing of we don't adapt to things. So the Growth Mindset Association came from, if you have a growth mindset, you're more likely to like believe that we can adapt while our climate's kind of changing and we can make that change. So that's where it comes into then the pro-environmental action to want to learn more of how we can kind of better ourselves. So yeah.
Thank you so much. Okay, well, y'all, we have come to our last presenter. Aw, but we still have one more. Yay! Our final presenter today is Kylan Spencer. Kylan is an environmental studies and business administration in information systems double major, and she's graduating in spring of 2023. So we have you for a whole another year.
Yes, you do.
That's great. Kylan is pursuing honors in environmental studies. Next year, she will actually be co-leading a project focused on increasing the sustainability curriculum required by and offered in the Foster School of Business. So she's going to be staying on campus, helping to increase sustainability curriculum offerings. The title of her presentation today is Small Business Communities, Overcoming Sustainability Obstacles Together. Her host organization was InWeave, the Marketplace on a Mission, where her site supervisor was Jacob Husky, who happens to actually be an alumni of our program. Woo! Yay! And it's always fun to to say something about Jacob's last name. It's Husky. Anyway, her faculty advisor is Lauren Broen from the UW Burke Center for Entrepreneurship. And with that, I'm going to turn it over to you, Kyle.
All right. Have you ever gone to throw something away and you're met with a system that looks a little bit like this? Sometimes there's instructions or photographs, but sometimes it's pretty unclear. This personal struggle is a small example of what decisions businesses have to make every single day. In high school, I was the assistant manager of a small vegan cafe, and when we weren't worried about how to get a cow out of our kitchen, we were focused on our environmental impact. As a business, this can look many different ways, and it's not just sorting trash. This contains considerations of waste management,
resource conservation, where we're sourcing our ingredients, and our community impact. Altogether, as the assistant manager and on our team, we struggled oftentimes to make the right decisions. This experience led me to looking at what the barriers are to sustainability for small businesses, and eventually how an eco-centered community can be utilized to reduce these barriers. Over the past year, I've been the business development intern at NWeave. NWeave is a nonprofit e-commerce marketplace focused on providing sustainable and accessible products to consumers. With my research, I wanted to explore how we could do the same for business owners facing struggles. In order to connect to these business owners, I distributed a survey to local small businesses. I also conducted interviews with experts in the field of sustainable business and conducted an extensive literature review on existing research. All of these methods led me to three main barriers: labor restraints, ambiguous definitions and certifications, and a lack of financial capital to invest in sustainable projects. Through my survey, the second and third largest barriers cited by business owners was a lack of time or lack of labor. In fact, 60% of business owners struggle to find the time or even the employees to dedicate to these new projects. And these new projects are even more time-consuming when the information is just simply unclear. Ambiguity was a huge barrier for these business owners. Survey respondents were cited saying dopey certifications, greenwashing, and unclear information was all struggle they faced. One survey respondent even shared her story of sourcing a compostable packaging, investing hundreds of dollars into compostable packaging, only later to find out that it was extremely water intensive and not as sustainable as advertised. This ambiguous nature of sustainability only exacerbates the financial hardships that these business owners are facing. A lack of financial resources was by far the most significant barrier faced by these businesses, with 94% of my survey respondents citing it. It was also a very common theme throughout all of my research. We all know that sustainable products are oftentimes more expensive, and small businesses are operating on very thin profit margins, and they're not able to always make this choice to switch to something that much more expensive. Luckily, throughout all of my research on the barriers, I actually found a lot of potential solutions that we can work on. One that I focused on the most was the development of an online, eco-centered community focused on collaboration and connecting of business owners. Like I said, this community would focus on connecting business owners that have like-minded goals, collaboration between business owners to solve common problems that they're all experiencing, and conveniently locating resources and research in one centralized location. If we take the example of sourcing a compostable packaging company, this business owner could take her experience to this online forum and share it with everyone. This will simultaneously be educating people, other business owners, on what not to do, while also asking for advice for people who may have been there before. This community can help to reduce some of the barriers that I've identified by increasing the team that a small business can work with and sparking a discussion on what sustainability actually means to all of us, all while keeping this information open and accessible to other business owners. But this is just the first step. These businesses are in extreme need for research that is more specific to organizations of their size and of their nature to understand their impacts and how they can mitigate them. They also really need government support that's focused on decreasing the financial burden or the ambiguous burden, so through funding and increased standards. Now take yourself back to that garbage can, making that tough choice. Imagine behind you there's a group of people, almost as big as this crowd, offering you advice, cheering you on, and supporting you throughout this decision. Now, it may seem funny, but it's a lot like how I envision this community of small business owners. And it's not always just one business that's caused this climate change, so why are they working alone to solve it? I want to thank Jacob Husky, my site supervisor, Loan Brahan, my faculty advisor, Yen Chu, she helped me a lot with my data, my mom's over there in the crowd, and all my friends are here too supporting me, so thank you guys so much. Any questions? Yes.
How many survey responses did you get, and how did you share the survey with business
Great question. I received 35 business or responses from small business owners from Seattle, and I actually distributed my survey 2 different ways. I did it online through cold emailing, DMing, Instagrams, and through other existing small business communities. And then I also printed out flyers and went to business neighborhoods and farmers markets and distributed it that way too. Yes.
Hopefully you can hear me. What surprised you about your research, if anything?
What surprised me? I would say the biggest surprise was the barrier of ambiguity. It was also the one that was the most challenging for me to kind of understand and to put into like a thing that I can explain very quickly. It's also more extensive than just what I was able to touch on in this presentation. It goes into corporate distrust between consumers and businesses, and there's a lot of distrust between businesses and suppliers that I didn't really know about. So that was probably one of the biggest surprises for me. Yes.
What was the biggest challenge overall throughout the whole project?
The biggest challenge I faced was I had 2. One was receiving survey responses. So one of the main barriers was lack of time, and it was pretty hard to convince these business owners to actually respond to my survey oftentimes. And then the second one was also finding adequate academic research for this topic. So a lot of my, I had 4 case studies that I specifically analyzed, and these were from Australia, Saudi Arabia, Uruguay, and Romania. But I wasn't able to find any specific to United States. And so I'm not sure if that was like the databases I was working with or what was going on, but it was definitely difficult to find research on this topic.
Well, one last question. This might be a hard one.
No problem.
So Seattle, we like to pass sustainability rules and regulations. Oftentimes, things like plastic bag bans or straw bans. Did any of the business owners that you spoke with, the small business owners, did they talk about sort of local regulation and rules that impacted them personally?
No, actually. I'm trying to think through my survey. There were some moments of free response that the business owners could share some of their experiences, but a lot of them were just asking for more resources. A lot of them suggested community development within small businesses, but none of them really spoke upon existing regulations. Yeah.
Okay, interesting. All right, well, Kylan, thank you so much. All right, I'm going to mic myself up for just a split second. Now I don't have to shout quite so much. Well, you have just heard 9 amazing presentations that I think probably changed your life, right? Yes? Yes, all right. Well, mission accomplished. We can all go home. But no, we're not going to go home. We're going to go outside and celebrate now, and I'm super excited for that part. But before we do, I do want to say a couple of thank yous. First of all, thank you to all of you for attending tonight. Really do appreciate you coming out and supporting the students here and in the poster highlight session previously. I also want to thank all of the folks who joined us last Wednesday for our online poster session as well. And again, we could not have done any of this day, this week, this quarter, or even this last year without the help of our faculty advisors and site supervisors from all over the organizations that we've worked with all over campus, all the different departments we've worked with as well. And of course, the support of friends and family, I think, has been instrumental to our students throughout. So big round of applause to all of these folks for helping out. I'm super excited to see friends and families and pets come here today to share in all of these presentations. It really has been a pleasure to meet our alumni again, to see families, and I hope that you all will stick around for our celebration outside. We've got tasty food from Patty Pan Co-op and I think some delicious and cold beers, I hope. Nice, I could use one. I also want to thank the POE faculty and staff for their support. Many, as you saw from today's presentations, many of our POE faculty help out with these capstone projects, acting as faculty advisors or aiding in data analysis. Our staff has been instrumental in making this program function. I want to highlight Glory, our student assistant, who's also our web guru, for doing all of our website materials and just helping get things done. I want to acknowledge Courtney Peets, our administrator, for all that she does in helping us get our food and get everything set up here today. And I want to thank our brand new advisor, Joy. I don't know if she's here, but she will be helping us moving into the future, and I appreciate her being with us. But I do want to just take a second to acknowledge Anna Mohammed for all that she does for us as well. So, big round of applause. I actually had more to say, but I apparently can't say it. So at this point, I would like to just welcome you all to join us out in the lobby and out on the lawn for some tasty eats and some delicious beverages. And have a great night, y'all. It's been fun. Well done, gang. Well done. Excellent work. All right. You did great, Emma. Amazing. Are we fist bumping? All right. All right. Well done, you two. That is a big mug there.
Okay. It's a water cup.
Oh, all right. Well done. Excellent presentation.
I think that was the best restaurant I've done.
Good. That's what you want, right?